Welcome back to episode 3 of the Goblincast, and in today's video, we're going to be switching it up. The last two are kind of been videos just from my most recent videos. Today's will actually be more of a theme that's very connected. We're going to be talking about some of the secrets and mysteries of Aegon the Conqueror's reign. We're going to start in part 1 looking at the Dornish letter that was sent to Aegon that officially ended the first conquest of Dorne. Then we're going to take a look at Aegon as a father. The second part then will be about Aegon, and is he actually infertile? Did he actually have kids in Aenys or Maegor, or were those by other men or even magic? In both cases, there have been rumors speculated that Aegon wasn't the father. And then in part 3, we'll be building off of that, and even if Aegon was the father, was he actually a bad father? Looking at his parenting style, or what the little information we know of on his parenting style over both Aenys and Maegor, because as we would know, both of their reigns didn't necessarily turn out the best, and either was really fit to rule. So I hope you enjoy this deep dive into Aegon's reign, and also I will say these were recorded a little bit in the past, so the audio quality is not going to be up to the same standards as it usually is, and also I will say, comment messy bed as soon as you see the parts of this video.
What was in the letter that was sent to Aegon the Conqueror from the Dornish? This was very pivotal because this is the point where the war against the Dornish ended. It had been going on for a number of years after Aegon had actually initially conquered most of Westeros. So I really want to get to the root of what actually happened and what was in that letter. It's one of the biggest mysteries in all of Fire and Blood that we probably may never get the actual answer to unless George just gives it to us. But he may just leave it up to mystery. I think that's what I would do personally if I was in his shoes, but let's go through it in this video and talk about not only that, but also the fate of Rhaenys Targaryen, the sister wife of Aegon. But before we do, if you would like to learn more about A Song of Ice and Fire, or just are interested in these conversations and topics, please consider subscribing, and let's get into the video. So, I think to set the groundwork first, we have to go through chronologically what happened. Here's what we know, or what we are told from Fire and Blood, that in 10 AC at Hellholt, a bolt from a scorpion pierced Meraxes through the eye, and it appears that the dragon fell from the sky with Rhaenys on its back, destroying half of the castle. Again, it's not made clear if she died right away or if she may have survived this. There's a lot of speculation within the community as to what happened. And so we have to determine what happens here because that affects how we view the letter. And so there's a number of possibilities. So the first possibility is that we take kind of the face value of it and Rhaenys died on the back of her dragon, right? We've seen a lot of that. That seems like the most likely option, that she just died. It's a really big fall, especially if she's still on the dragon, or the dragon, basically dying. That's a lot of weight, right? You would be squashed to death. So that's kind of the first option. The second option is that Rhaenys may have jumped off of Meraxes' back and somehow survived. Now, I will say in this scenario, if she did survive this jump or fall, there is no way that she was healthy. She would have been in a critical condition. Think about Aegon when it comes to the Dance of the Dragons, right? He gets into his little fight, and again, similar. Funny enough, it's also with a Rhaenys, but a different Rhaenys. And think about his condition, right? He is basically presumed to be dead or dying. Physically, he is disabled after this point. And so Rhaenys, if she did survive this at this point of it, right? Because we're going to go further after this point, because this is only option 2. She could have lived a little after this and then died very shortly after. Now, that's option 2. And in that option, I think it's likely that some information could have been told to the Ollers. Again, they are the people that would have been closest to this happening. The third option is that Rhaenys survived, and yes, she might have needed healing, but she was healed enough to survive quite a while longer, to then maybe being tortured and then eventually killed. I think there's one last option that people like to talk about in the community, is that she actually survived and went undercover, whether that's because she married into the Danes or one of these houses, or into the Dornish as well, but secretly kept into some sort of disguise. And so those are the kind of the major options. Again, I want to point out, for me personally, I do not have a theory that I 100% subscribe behind. I think there are elements of a lot of theories that I think are interesting, but again, I don't have a concrete view of it because I think it's left up to interpretation quite a lot. And so when we look at this part specifically about Rhaenys and her fall, I would tend to believe the first and second option are the most likely. Either A, she instantly died upon her fall, or the second option being she fell, was in critical condition, and lived long enough to either give a message to the Ollers, give sort of, either this is something that they wanted, that she wants Aegon to know, whether it's some sort of message that would have been important to the Dornish, of finding some way to maybe blackmail Aegon. So all of that I think is very relevant to this conversation, because we get to the point of this letter that Aegon gets that ends the war. What could it have been? Because the way Aegon reads this letter is he's on the throne, he's reading it, like, basically he's not reading it out loud, but he's reading it silently to himself in front of court. And apparently it is something that hits him so emotionally that it makes his hand bleed, whether that's from gripping the chair or gripping the letter. Not exactly sure on that idea. I would assume it's the chair. That makes logical sense because a lot of people, again, make accidents on the chair. It's very easy to cut yourself. But because of this letter being so important, it causes Aegon, who, funny enough, builds this chair, to then, you know, misremember it. The struggles of ruling and all of that. It plays into it really nicely. So we know that happens. Now, Aegon himself does not give out any emotion of anger or sadness or anything, but we know that he goes to Dragonstone to think it over, and then when he comes back, he makes peace with Dorne. So I want to point something else out, because this is also important. I want to get all the book evidence that we have here out in front, and then we'll kind of analyze it and kind of look at some of the theories and which ones I think hold a little bit more water and some I don't really like. So the first part of this is, we know that the peace is accepted in 13 AC, but we know that 10 years later in 23 AC, that Aegon actually goes with his eldest son, Prince Aenys, to Sunspear to celebrate the peace. And it appears that Aegon had good relations with Princess Daria. So, okay, we know that they actually had a good functioning relationship at that point. So what was in this letter? Like, what could it have been that convinces Aegon that he needs to end the war now? And so let's just take a look at some ideas here, and things that I think are relevant to understanding. So I think a lot of this has to deal with, one, we don't really know a lot about Aegon's personality. From what we can tell, he is someone that didn't show a lot of emotion. He was a very stoic figure. So something would have to really affect him if it gets this big of a reaction. The other part of it is we have to look at, he had a really big love for his sister Rhaenys, right? He definitely liked Rhaenys as in a loving, more relationship with her than he ever did Visenya. And you also have to think about this from a Targaryen point of view. Rhaenys was not only the love of Aegon's life, again, it's told that Aegon married Visenya out of duty and Rhaenys out of love. So Rhaenys was not only his sister, but also his wife, the love of his life. So I think it is logical to assume that some part of this letter did involve her. Now, the question is, how far did it go? Like, how much of this was she involved in? So some people, and this kind of ties all the way back to did she survive, would suggest that Rhaenys was tortured to death and gave away some sort of information that would have caused Aegon to go to Dragonstone. Because going to Dragonstone is another key part of this. Some people suggest that Aenys was under threat, whether that be by a faceless man or assassins from Dorne as a whole. The text suggests, or George suggests, that maybe it could have been some sort of, a list of names because of the war casualties. It could have been heartfelt words from one father to another. I think all that's just bullshit. I don't think that actually holds any water. I don't think any of that makes any sense. So where would this have gone? So what could have been in this letter then? And so the next part of it is, like, was it a threat? Did some part of this letter hold a threat? Whether that was, hey, if you don't back off, we're going to continue to torture Rhaenys just enough to where she stays alive, but if you have peace, we'll give her a merciful death. I don't think that's it. But what else could you have threatened Aegon on, right? Think about all the times that Aegon is threatened throughout the Conquest, throughout these early years in the Dornish wars. Think about the assassinations on his life that were usually thwarted, or actually always thwarted. I don't know why I said usually. So what would do that would shock Aegon, right? I don't know what could have done that. The only thing I can think of, right, because you also have to think of, if it was a really big threat, why does Aegon then have good relations with Dorne later on 10 years down the road? And so we have to think about, it probably was not a threat. It couldn't have been something that would anger Aegon or keep up that bad blood between the two sides. It just doesn't make sense for that to be the case. But what does that mean then, right? Was it that Rhaenys sends some sort of message to Aegon, right? Maybe saying some sort of phrase or memory that the two connected on, telling Aegon to stop this war? Could that be part of it? Right? Like, what would make him stop the war? And that's what I struggle on so much, because I don't have an answer, right? So that's why I'd love to hear your guys' opinions on this, because I have no answer for this. I've thought myself in the past, but then I've kind of poked holes in my own thought process, but could it have been a mixture of both? Could it have been an idea where the Dornish proposed that Rhaenys send some sort of message to Aegon, while also the Dornish saying, hey, we want peace. We don't want this to go any, longer. Both sides are committing war crimes. We're both losing people. This is going nowhere. While also mixing in a threat. Mixing in that, like, yes, we can have peace and all these things, but if we don't, the Dornish may be forced to kill your heirs. What's going to happen when you're gone, Aegon? Like, we will always be a thorn in the side of your family and a threat to ending your dynasty well after you're gone. That is something that I think could have worked, because it would have been something that shows, yes, we're trying to make amends. We're trying to, rally up and, create this peace. But if you don't do this, this is what could happen, right? You could be looking over your shoulder for years, and not just you, your kids. Your kids. Like, that's something that I think could have worked, because it's not a threat as in it's direct, but it's almost like, oh yeah, our generations will be killing each other. Why keep having this conflict when we can just make peace, right? We've been doing this for years and years. We've all lost loved ones. Let's end it. I think that is a logical part of it, while adding in a part of it that, yes, maybe Rhaenys did survive and lived long enough to they got a message or something out of her to like spark something in Aegon to end the war. Because the problem is, and I think this idea that History of Westeros presents, is this idea that they had Rhaenys still as a captive, more or less, and they were torturing her and all this stuff, and the only way that Aegon could get it to stop was by causing peace. Like, they would just kill her and she could have like a, actually stop having all this pain. But that to me doesn't feel right with the character of Aegon. I think Aegon actually would have done the opposite. I think Aegon would have continued the war until he found her, or they presented her as being dead. So to me, I personally think that I don't agree with that, because I don't think that's the person that Aegon was. Now, the other part of it is like, that could be the case, right? That could be true, because he never tells Visenya. From what we can tell, he never tells Visenya what was in this letter. Nobody knows what was in this letter besides Aegon, I would assume. The other part of this that I find interesting is like, how many people in the Dornish family knew what was in this letter? Like, was it just their prince at the time? Like, how many people knew this? And that's the thing I struggle with, right? Because this letter doesn't come up, right? We don't find any information out about this outside of like Fire and Blood and the World of Ice and Fire. Like, the history's text is only listed like here. We don't really find out anything else about it. And so what possibly could be doing that to make Aegon have to contemplate it so much he goes to Dragonstone? Could even Aegon's prophecy be part of this, right? Like, could it be that Aegon realizes that, oh yeah, like, I need Dorne, but they're not bending the knee. So how does that work with my dream that I have to have all of Westeros united? Did Rhaenys say something to Aegon in this message that would have maybe mentioned something about his dream and maybe changed his mind? That maybe it was generations from now, not exactly him that was supposed to help against this threat of the others. Again, I'm not fully on board with the Aegon's prophecy thing, just because it kind of feels like it kind of feels like a retcon to me, because there's no real textual evidence to suggest he had anything like that, or that that is in the story at this point. But who knows? But let me know what you guys think, because I find the Dornish letter to Aegon to be so interesting. What could be in this letter that would cause Aegon Targaryen, someone that was very headstrong, it seems, he was very stoic, he wasn't moved by a lot of things, by threats and things like that, that could have taken him off of his pedestal and made him think, yeah, we need to end this war. Right? Because I don't think the book evidence really makes a lot of sense. Like, the explanations people throw out, like having a faceless man, doesn't seem logical at this point, right? Like, I just don't think that is the case. Because let's say they hire a faceless man to kill Aenys, right? Okay, like, you give up, what, 2/3 of your wealth and lands and all that to kill Aenys. Aegon was still, again, had another heir at this point with Maegor, so okay, you send a faceless man to kill Aegon, you still have heirs in Visenya, so, like, I don't think a faceless man would have done it. Like, I don't think that the Dornish, would have done that way, and I think that Aegon wouldn't have believed that they were going to do it anyway. Was Aegon actually unable to have children? And so there's a lot of reasons that this theory is brought up. It has a lot of valid reasons. I'm going to talk about some of the criticisms, as I am someone that maybe doesn't believe this theory that much. Like I talked about, I think it is very interesting to study. But the whole idea is going to come from this idea that Aegon is born 27 years before the Conquest. So again, he was a young man by the time the Conquest started. He wasn't like Rob's age or anything. Like, he was a man grown at this time. But yet, he didn't have any heirs until 7 AC, when Aenys is born, when Aegon himself is 34 years old. Visenya did not give birth to Maegor until 12 AC. Again, Aegon was going towards his 40s at this point. Now, this isn't unheard of. We know of people having children at older ages. Even Visenya at the time, I believe, was like 41. She was older than Aegon. The whole idea here is, okay, were these actually Aegon's children? So let's look at the main idea here. The main idea here is, how did Aegon go almost 15, 20 years while being married to Visenya and Rhaenys, having 2 wives, again, 2 chances, and not having any children until much later in life? And that's a valid criticism. Was it that Aegon just was not worried about sleeping with his queens, about having children? Was it that he just got unlucky? Was that kind of what ended up happening? Because it's just very odd, given the circumstances that Aegon and Rhaenys were said to have a very good relationship. And so you would think that they would be sleeping together or trying to have a child, but maybe you could bring up the point that, okay, maybe Aegon did not want children around before the Conquest or during the Conquest, because it's going to be a dangerous time. You don't want to have to be looking over a child while you're trying to take over, or you're trying to unite this entire continent. That's plausible, but I do find it hard to believe. Now, you can make more excuses with Aegon and Visenya, because the two did not really have like that relationship, right? Theirs was more of a dutiful relationship. It's how it's described in Fire and Blood. It reminds me a lot of like Stannis and Selyse, where they do their duty, but they're not like romantically involved, I think, that greatly. I think for them, it is more like a actual family type relationship, as disgusting as that is to say, with the incest going on, but that's how I've always read them. And so when we come to this point of the story where it's like, okay, Aegon has now taken the throne and he still doesn't have any kids. It still takes another 7 years after Aegon is on the throne for Aenys to be born. So did Rhaenys and Visenya and Aegon get desperate? Did they realize he wasn't having kids? And did Aegon allow Rhaenys to go with maybe one of these other people that would have been lusting after her? Did Aegon allow Visenya to go with someone else and to make a child, just so they could keep the line going? That's interesting, because it is something that I think Aegon would have done if he believed he couldn't have children. It's something I could see Visenya doing as well. But I think when you look at the counter argument, so again, this is going to be the introductory of the theory. I don't really think there's a lot of evidence supporting it that we know of. Evidence that you can concretely look at and say, yes, this is evidence for why. Maybe another thing you could point to is that Aenys and Maegor were not really like Aegon at all. I mean, Aegon is someone that was firm and just, but also could be very kind. He was very smart when it came to politically unifying the entire country, whereas Maegor and Aenys really weren't that. But the way I look at that, and this is going to start kind of the counter arguments to this, is that one, I think Maegor and Aenys are used to really represent their mothers a lot more than they are representing their father. Where Maegor is quite literally an interpretation of Visenya, but in male form. Maegor is very similar to Visenya. Visenya is one of Maegor's closest allies and advisors. When Visenya dies, it hurts Maegor a lot. And we don't really see this when Aegon dies. We know very little of Aegon and Maegor's relationship, which is another reason that I think the two aren't alike, is because I don't think Aegon was really a present factor in Maegor's life. We don't really see any of that. Now, Aenys, I'm not sure about Aenys, because Aenys was the person that was going to become king, but even in Aenys, we see a lot of, I think, more of Rhaenys in him than we do Aegon. And so we look at the two sides of the coin, where you have Aenys is too weak and Maegor is too overbearing. And I think it's an interesting contrast, because we see how Aegon was someone that always balanced those things really well. He could be someone that could assert his dominance, could flex the power of the Targaryens like we see at Harrenhal, but he also could be someone that was very forgiving, and he could be someone that knew how to make allies. And that is something that we see constantly, whether that be with the Tullys or the Tyrells. He was someone that was able to manage that really well and not do conflict when it wasn't needed. That was something that Aenys and Maegor struggled to do. I have looked at this theory, and I think it's an interesting theory, and I think it's a valid theory. It has a lot of skepticism to it, but I think it undermines really what was going on. And I do think there is the possibility, like I mentioned earlier on in this video, that Aegon was not really as concerned about having heirs early on, right? When he was busy planning his invasion of Westeros, planning how he was going to do all these things, and even thinking about like having a baby around or a young child around during the conquest was just something that wasn't needed. Because think about how vital Visenya and Rhaenys were. What happens if they get pregnant right during the conquest? How does that impact their ability to be one of the leading generals or leading people in Aegon's circle at this time? The dragons are the main reason they win, right? Rhaenys and the Stormlands is the biggest reason they're able to take down Argilac. Visenya having a dragon in Vhagar is the main reason, though, and her diplomacy is one of the biggest reasons she's able to help take the Vale, or the reason she's able to take Crackclaw Point. So I think it's this understanding that even that Aegon knew he shouldn't really have children around this point. And so then it comes to the idea, well, okay, why is there this then 7-year gap? And maybe Aegon could have viewed this as, okay, I still don't want children yet because we're going to be doing the Conquest of Dorne. And maybe Aegon just didn't think he was going to die, that after he took most of Westeros and turned to Dorne, there was no threat to them, right? They'd taken over Westeros, you know, far bigger numbers than what the Dornish were going to be able to provide against them. And that kind of backfired on him a little bit. Now, we do know that, again, Aenys is born before Rhaenys dies, but still, it is a wonder to think that Aegon doesn't start having children into his mid-30s, late 30s. It's a little peculiar. It's something that we see the Targaryens struggle with a lot throughout history. Maegor is someone that struggles with having children. Maybe that's something he gets from his father, right? We didn't even consider that angle, that Maegor, maybe the reason he struggles with children outside of a lot of these more cruel, or I guess unworthy Targaryens are struggling to have children. Maybe that's one of the reasons that when you look at the main Targaryen, Aegon Targaryen, he is someone that struggled with having children, and that's something he passed down all the way down the Targaryen line, and something we could even see affecting someone like Daenerys in the future, alongside of what ends up happening with kind of the a killing of her baby and that blood sacrifice. So let me know what you guys think about Aegon being infertile. I personally don't take a lot of stock in it. I think it's a very fascinating idea. I really like talking about the idea. I just don't think it is that realistic for me. I think one of the biggest things that I find is very jarring to me is how Aegon treated his children, specifically Maegor. From an early age, it's very much seen that Maegor did not have much interaction with his father, if at all. It seems like the way things went down was Maegor ended up being much more closer with his mother. That's very apparent in the deaths of Aegon and Visenya. Visenya's death seemed to really hurt Maegor and seemed to really damage his psyche, and also having someone he could really lean on and trust. Whereas when his father passed, it doesn't really feel like Maegor had that type of reaction to his father's death, and I think that's very understandable, right? Maegor was someone that was not really interacting with his father much, right? Because later in Aegon's life, and especially in Visenya's life, what ended up happening is it was kind of like Aegon was in one place and Visenya would be in another. And Visenya and Maegor were almost always together. So what ended up happening is Maegor almost never interacted with his father at all. And you have to see, if you're Aegon, and this is something I just find that like he just didn't do correctly. He never really bridged that gap, right? You could see that there are factions forming, right? And maybe Aegon thought, oh, Visenya would never do anything to Rhaenys' line and type stuff, but you have to look at this from this point of view, is that Visenya and Aegon were not on good terms. Her son Maegor was growing quite a lot like her. He just at no point ever was he really doing anything for Maegor. Because later, and again in his reign, and as his reign started to develop, Aegon would take Rhaenys along with these processions around the country, whether that was to go to the north, like White Harbor, Barrowtown, or even Winterfell once, or he would go to other places like in the Westerlands or the Riverlands and the Reach. He never took Maegor. There's no indication here that we see that Maegor went on these, which seems very stupid. Like, what if something did happen to Rhaenys before Aegon died? Well, Maegor now has not been on any of these. He's not been being groomed to rule, because again, it even seems apparent that Aegon wasn't really teaching Maegor anything anyway. And so I come to this idea, I'm like, why did he keep the two so separate? Because they don't feel anything alike, really. Again, they are two separate personalities, but a lot of that is due to they just didn't interact much, it would appear, right? Like, Rhaenys and Maegor really don't have any type of relationship that we can tell from Fire and Blood until Rhaenys becomes king. And then they rule together for, you know, like I think 2 years, and that's about it. But it just seems very dumb to me that Aegon didn't do that. Like, he didn't take the necessary precautions to make sure that the two lines were secure. Because you would have thought, okay, you're having two wives, it's a little sketchy when it comes to succession. Like, yes, Rhaenys, by all the laws, is supposed to come first. But what if the other brother, after you're gone, is stronger and has more power? Well, what's going to happen then? And another thing that maybe Aegon didn't foresee happening was Maegor actually getting his dragon, Balerion, right? That doesn't happen, obviously, until after Aegon's death. So maybe Aegon didn't view Maegor as big of a threat to the line because he only had Visenya's sword. He only had Dark Sister at the time, so he didn't have Blackfire or Balerion, so that's also possible. But again, I think also you have to think about Visenya would have been on Maegor's side in regards to pretty much anything that happened, right? And she has Vhagar, the second largest dragon. So I don't know. It just seems like maybe it's hindsight that I'm looking at this and I'm going, wow, that was kind of stupid, Aegon. Why didn't you like help reconcile the two sides? And the thing is, right, like it wasn't like there wasn't an opportunity to do so, right? Because there was a chance that they could have unified the lines. The way that this would have been done and the way it would have made Visenya happy and probably Maegor happy as well would have been by marrying Rhaena to Maegor. Now, Rhaena was quite younger, so it would have had to have been a betrothal to Maegor. It wouldn't have been a marriage right away. It would have had to wait for a number of years. But this doesn't happen. Everyone seems to go against this. And I find it interesting because we know the reason why. The reason why is because the faith. right? If this would have happened here, it could have caused some issues for the Targaryens right away, because think about it. Remember, the reason a lot of this stuff doesn't creep up, like with the faith, is two reasons. One is because Aegon is still here. You don't really want to piss him off. Like it's said in Fire and Blood that they didn't condone Aegon's actions, like his marriage with his sister wives and stuff like that, but they also didn't accept it either. They didn't say it was legal. So they were kind of in an in-between. They were kind of waiting for that next domino to fall to then start condemning the Targaryens. So part of it was Aegon was still too powerful. They didn't really want to upset him at this time. Remember, there's a lot of things. Remember, when Aegon goes to the Old Town, mysteriously, the doors are open and they don't fight. So again, they didn't really want to fight him. The second part of it is there wasn't really any marriages to look at and go, yeah, we can really condemn that, right? Like, Aenys ends up marrying a cousin. That's not too bad. In Westeros, that kind of happens a lot. Like, think about Tywin and his cousin, Joanna. So, nothing too bad there. So, it only starts to prickle up when Maegor possibly could have been betrothed to Rhaena. And this would have been a very smart move, in my opinion. It would have tied both of the lines together. Now, would this have solved the issue? That I'm not as certain on. Right? Because eventually still the same thing would have resulted in happening. Aenys would have came to become king. His son Aegon would have been the heir, but we still would have had an issue, right? We would have had an issue once again. Because when Aenys dies, would Maegor still have just taken the crown anyway because he could take it by force? It is hard to understand what could have happened here, because we know that Maegor was probably barren and he would have taken more wives regardless. So what could have occurred here actually could have made it even worse. If Rhaena's not giving him any children, would that have also screwed that up, like made it even more, a lot of tension between both sides if he cast away, like for instance Rhaena? Possibly. So again, I think the idea though is, like, we know that with hindsight that wouldn't have worked, right? We know with hindsight, Rhaena and Maegor would not have been a good match just because of what happens later. But I think without hindsight, logically, this would have been a good choice. You unite both claims. Visenya is not on Aegon's back or Aenys' back nearly as much because Maegor is much higher in the succession because of that marriage at the time. And so I think it could have been a beneficial marriage. But again, I think the biggest problem that I want to really harp on is Aegon really did nothing to try and basically make both groups happy. He kind of let those things fester and just didn't even worry about it to a degree. And he also didn't even help try and make Maegor a better person. Try to teach him skills that are maybe counterintuitive to what Visenya was telling him, to make him more well-rounded. And maybe you're thinking, oh, well, maybe Maegor was too far gone and Aegon realized that. Well, I disagree, right? I think Aegon does not seem like he was present in Maegor's life from a very early age, and so all he got was Visenya. If Aegon had been more of a parent to Maegor, that could have helped balance those things out, right? Think about Joffrey. Joffrey becomes the person that he is. A lot of the reason is because he only really has Cersei. Robert is not really a father to him. His real father and Jaime can't be that person, so he really just has Cersei. So think about how Joffrey could have been maybe different if he had a better parent, right? To bounce those ideas off of and create more of a complete character. And that's my biggest problem with Aegon as a person. And yes, I want to keep in mind that Aegon had a lot of things going on at the time, right? Again, the first part of this, you also have the First Dornish War. Again, Maegor is born around at the end of that time. You also have other things going on, whether that's making the realm whole at this point. For instance, Aegon was not really in Dragonstone or would become King's Landing for about half of the year. He would be traveling the country, trying to basically keep the country together. His first priority was peace. And I think something that History Westeros brings up that I think is very important to understand is I think Aegon was trying to establish a peace for now. That was his major goal. It was not the peace for the future. It was establishing and to start off his reign of peace. And that kind of had its repercussions in the way he dealt with things like the faith Aenys and Maegor, is they didn't get the attention that they really deserved or needed. So let me know what you guys think about Aegon as a parent. I think that's one of his biggest pitfalls, was the way that he treated Aenys and Maegor, because even Aenys, it seems like he did try to make Aenys prepared, but it didn't go well, right? Like Aenys was too soft. He wasn't decisive. He wasn't strong enough to become king. And so I think Aenys as a character is not inherently a bad person, right? He doesn't strike me as a bad person. Like, there's a lot of US presidents that don't strike you as bad people, but they were not the right fit for a president. And that's kind of what Aenys strikes me as. He strikes me as someone that was not able to be decisive and all of that. And the question I have, and this is why I find a TV show that maybe covers some of Aenys' early life and Maegor's early life, is what did Aegon tell Aenys? Like, did he give Aenys the instructions of, you need to be decisive, you can't pester, you can't fester on what decision you're going to make, you've got to be decisive and figure out what you're going to do? It just seems like a lot of that was missing, and that's a little bit more speculation, because Aenys was with Aegon much more, whereas Maegor we know wasn't, right? Just based off of where characters were. So let me know what you guys all think about this video, and also let me know if you do want to see another video on Aegon and kind of this time period with the faith. But thank you guys all for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.